Welcome to today's final exam planning session. I'm Betsy Malarsic, and I'm a learning skills specialist with the Academic Resource Center. Today's webinar is going to be fairly active as I'm going to be showing you the questions that I ask when helping students plan out their final exam study schedules. Feel free to work alongside me and complete these same steps for your own final exams. And feel free to ask any questions throughout in the chat. So let's get started. Step one of sitting down and planning out your study schedule is to grab the tools you need to come up with an effective plan. I typically work with a paper printout and different colored pens. For today, I'm working with a PDF copy of Passion Planner's December calendar template. Passion Planner is a great resource if you're looking for stylish PDFs to work with. What I really appreciate about them is that digital copies of their planner templates are available on their website for free. So if you're not ready to commit to a physical planner or you just want a few pages, you can head to their website and download one of their free templates. Once you've grabbed your planner and you know where you're mapping things out, we can move on to step two, which is writing down your deadlines. I approach a lot of the planning process by working backwards. I create a plan based on when I need to be finished rather than what I need to do to get started. Writing down your deadlines helps you understand when you need to have these tasks completed by. So for this particular final cycle, I have 5 major deadlines. So I have 2 sit-down exams on Friday, December 9th. I have a theology paper due the next day, December 10th. Then I have a government essay due at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, December 13th, and a Spanish exam on Wednesday, December 14th. So already by looking at these deadlines written down, I have a sense of where my busy periods are going to be focused. So let's move on to step 3. The first 2 steps were fairly easy. Figuring out which days we'll work on which assignments is where planning starts to get a little bit trickier. For my particular final exam schedule, I have both tests and papers. So with that in mind, my step 3 is going to be figuring out which days I will study for which exams. A few study rules to keep in mind. It's better to study for shorter blocks over a longer period of time than it is to study for several hours in one big block of time. When we're studying, we're testing our ability to recall information as much as we are testing our comprehension of that information. Giving yourself a longer period of time to study is a successful method because it gives you more time to practice remembering information after having forgotten it. Doing this strengthens the neural connections that you have in your brain in terms of accessing that information. So again, short periods over a longer period of time is going to be more successful. But we're busy people, we have a lot going on. So with this in mind, I try to schedule about 5 days to prepare for each exam. Creating the study schedule for sociology and calculus is the most straightforward. I don't have any major assignments or deadlines the 5 days prior, which means that I can plan on spending the 5 days beforehand studying for those 2 exams. So I know that I'm going to be studying for those 2 exams Sunday, December 4th through Thursday, December 8th. Of course, while we are putting these study blocks down, we're also going to be figuring out our study goals. So another rule for you as you're planning your final exam study schedule is to always clarify what your study goal is when scheduling a study block. Breaking down your larger tasks into smaller tasks makes it easier to plan them out, while also helping you ensure that you have enough time to complete all of your goals. For my sociology and calculus exams, I unfortunately don't have all the information that I need to develop a full study plan. My professors have hinted that we're going to be going over this next week. So I'm going to fill out a rough study plan based on the 5-day test prep guide on the Academic Resource Center's website. So under this breakdown, the goal for day 1 is to create a study plan for each subject and to clarify my study goals for each day. I don't know the full exam details yet, but I'll know them by Sunday, December 4th. So for now, I'm going to plan on sitting down and looking over my materials and getting organized for both classes on that Sunday. Day 2 of the 5-day test prep plan is to review the hardest material. It makes sense to review the hardest material before the easier material because it allows you more time to ask questions while also providing you with more time to process your understanding of the material. So day 3's task is to review the easier material or the material that you're most comfortable with. I plan on narrowing down what material I'm focusing on based on what I think I need to review for this specific exam. Some students try to be completionists and review everything they've ever done in class before taking the exam, but you can't retake the course. It's better to focus on a few specific topics and materials that you feel you can really engage with in a meaningful way. Day 4 should be the day that you spend the most time preparing for your exam. Many students leave this period of intense focus for the day before, but that can often exhaust you and it doesn't leave much time to process the information. So by doing an intense review on day 4, you can dig into specific topics that you have big questions about. And if you have any practice tests available, that's a good day to sit down and do that. So day 4 in my 5-day test prep plan is going to be heavy review for sociology and a practice test for calculus. That means that day 5 should be spent doing general review. I shouldn't try to learn anything new on the day before an exam. If I don't know it at this point, it's too late to really learn it now. So instead, I should be using this day to look over the information that I've been actively covering in the last several days. So that is a general study template that you can follow if you don't have a sense of how to approach studying for a particular exam. However, if you have a better sense of how you want to study, then try to be specific in terms of how you'll spend these study days. The more specific you can be in creating your plan, then the easier it will be to execute the plan. I can show you what a more specific study plan will look like for my Spanish exam. For this exam, I have a clear sense of what topics I need to cover and what materials I need to study from. So for this exam, which is on Wednesday, December 14th from 4 to 6 p.m., I have 4 items that I want to focus on during my study time. First, I need to review vocabulary. So I know for me, the best way to do this is by creating and looking over flashcards. Next, I need to review grammar. I can cover grammar from all of the chapters that I need by redoing worksheets from the semester, of which there are 10 in total. So far we have vocab flashcards, 10 grammar worksheets. I have a practice test that I would like to complete. That's the third thing. And finally, I'm allowed to bring in an index card with vocab terms on it, which the professor calls a cheat sheet. So I need to make my cheat sheet sometime before the exam. Once again, with planning, I'm going to begin by working backwards. My Spanish exam is at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, which is a tricky time, I don't want to leave significant studying for the day of the exam, but I don't want to ignore the material on that day either. So with that in mind, I'll plan on creating my cheat sheet this day and doing some general review. But my main task is the cheat sheet. I figure at that point, I'll know what I'm not comfortable with and what should be on there. And asking myself about that process will be a good way to do general review in general. So I mentioned before that the 2 days prior to the exam should be the most difficult material, while the day before the exam should be easier material. With that in mind, I plan on taking my practice exam 2 days before the final, along with reviewing flashcards. I will then use the day before the exam to look over my answers and the material I missed, as well as, you guessed it, continuing to review my flashcards. I also have 10 grammar exercises I want to work through. At this point, I have 2 days left, Saturday the 10th and Sunday the 11th. But with an essay due on the evening of the 10th, that theology essay, I doubt that I'll get through much that day. So I want to plan the bulk of my studying for Sunday. So with that in mind, I'm going to plan on doing 7 of the 10 worksheets on Sunday and 3 worksheets on Saturday. I want to get started on Saturday, but I know that most of my mental focus will be on that essay. And then both days, I'm also planning on reviewing my flashcards. So I've scheduled 4 real study days for this exam. I don't really count making the cheat sheet on the 14th as an intense study day. And I usually like to schedule 5 study days, as I mentioned. However, I know that I won't have the capacity to focus on Spanish that week before when I'm still working on sociology and calculus. So another rule to keep in mind is this. Try to limit how many subjects you're working on in one day as much as possible. This will make it easier to focus, but it will also make it less likely that you'll push a subject from your study plan. I try to schedule 2 subjects per day, one that I can focus on throughout the morning and one that I can focus on in the afternoon. If I need to do more than 2 subjects, then I try to make sure that I'm doing less intense work for each subject as much as possible. So if I were to try to start Spanish on Friday, December 9th, when I have 2 exams and I'm finished at 6 p.m., I know it would be extremely likely I would just not study for Spanish at all that day because I'm tired and it's too many things on one day. It would get bumped. So since I can't fit in any other significant Spanish study days directly before the exam, I can do some prep work well before the exam. This is another tip to keep in mind. If you have a lot of deadlines close to one another, do preliminary setup work earlier when you do have the time. So for Spanish, the preliminary work that I need to do is create flashcards. So I am going to do that task on Saturday, December 3rd, which is a day that I have time to focus on exams, but I don't have any immediate exams forthcoming. So even though Saturday, December 3rd is, well over a week beforehand, and I'm not ready to think about Spanish, I'll be helping out my future self by spending time just doing the labor of making flashcards that day. So we've completed step 3 of scheduling, which is determining my test study blocks. Now I can move on to step 4, which is figuring out when I will be working on my papers. So let's start by blocking out this theology paper, which is due Saturday, December 10th at 9 p.m. Again, I'm going to be working backwards. This is an assignment that I can, in theory, begin working on well before the deadline. However, I find it difficult to work too far ahead of the deadline because there's so much other work being done. So I have most of the day on Saturday to work on this essay. Again, it's not due until 9 p.m., but leaving an entire essay for one day seems like a bad idea. With that in mind, I'm going to plan on writing my introduction and my conclusion on this day, as well as revising my essay and working on works cited. Another study tip to keep in mind is to try to revise your essay on a different day than when you draft it. You are a better editor when you're looking at your own writing after a day away from it. More importantly, it can be easier to write an essay when you know that you have time later on to perfect it. Sometimes it can be difficult to start an assignment when you feel like it has to be perfect. So planning editing time later gives you permission to write an imperfect draft and to perfect it in the next day. Now I'm going to take a look at the week before to see what days I can work on writing the bulk of this essay. So most of the week of the 4th is dedicated to studying sociology and calculus, which means I need to work on this essay over the weekend beforehand, primarily on Friday, December 2nd and Saturday, December 3rd. Another tip when planning a study schedule: predict when you're most likely to procrastinate and plan less complex work for that time. I know that on Friday, December 2nd, I'm going to be pretty tired. I still have classes this week. It's a Friday, it happens. If I try to write an entire paper on Friday, December 2nd, I will put it off indefinitely. So my plan is to use Friday to develop my thesis, do research, and work on my outline. Then I can use Saturday to work on the bulk of my draft and finish up my draft on Sunday. So Saturday will be the day that I'm mainly focused on this assignment. This leads to another good practice when planning a study schedule. Start small. Starting by doing something manageable and realistic, such as outlining and researching, makes it easier to get started on an intimidating assignment. That's also why it's good for sociology and calculus, how my first step is just to develop a plan. Start with something that you can manage and that you won't procrastinate as much. So we have blocked out when I'm working on this theology essay. We have one more assignment to time block, which is my government essay. It is due Tuesday, December 13th at 4 p.m. A 4 p.m. deadline doesn't leave me a ton of time to work on the essay that day. So my primary task that day will be to edit the essay. Hopefully I will have a rough draft finished before that day. So that means I'm going to have to do the bulk of my work on that essay on Sunday the 11th and Monday the 12th. So let's aim to split it up evenly, completing 3 pages on Sunday and 3 pages on Monday. I know myself, I know that 3 pages, as you see also for the theology paper, is about what I feel confident that I can complete in one sitting. In a perfect world, I'll get more done, but the best plan is a realistic plan. So what happened to the tip I gave about starting small? I know that I'll write this essay more efficiently if I've already outlined it. But right now I have as my first block for working on it, sit down on Sunday the 11th and write 3 pages. Looking over this calendar though, I don't see how I can fit outlining into the week beforehand. I just have too many things going on at once. As much as I would like to complete this paper in 1 week, I just don't think it's possible. So I am going to add the outlining process much earlier to Friday, December 2nd, which is my first finals day. So I'm going to be working on essentially one of my last finals on my first finals prep day. This isn't ideal in terms of getting into an effective mental flow, but I have to be realistic about how much time I need to complete the assignment compared to what time I have available. There's one more major step in creating your study schedule, and that's figuring out what time each day you will work on each subject. Having a sense of how you're breaking up your days will make it more likely that you will stick to an ambitious study schedule. So there are two approaches to figuring out what time of day you're working on each subject. One is to think about which time of day you work best and to plan on focusing on your more difficult subject during that time of day. That's the approach I've taken in planning out my sociology and calculus study days. So for my calendar here, basically anything that I've put first in the calendar is what I plan on working on in the morning, and anything I've put second is what I plan on working on in the afternoon and evening. So with the sociology and calculus blocks, I have put sociology in the morning and calculus for the afternoon, evening. That's because calculus is more active and involves more practice, which for me personally is easier to execute when I'm tired. I don't have to process it. It's more about just kind of automatic practice. And mental processing is a big part of studying and learning sociology. So for me, I put the harder subject when my mind is sharpest. Again, what subject is harder for you or needs more focus, and what time you work is going to be individual, and it's going to vary person to person. The other way to approach what you will work on when is to think about which subject is the priority for the day that you will definitely focus on versus which subject is the afterthought that you are more likely to skip. This is the thought process that I'm considering when scheduling out my Spanish study blocks. On most days when I'm studying Spanish, I will also be working on a paper. On Saturday the 10th, it's the theology paper, and then after that, it's the government paper. So with the papers, they stand out as the larger daily priorities for me, and I know I'm going to focus on them no matter what. I have to write that government paper. I know I'm going to write at least a few pages, even if it's not all 3. But paper writing takes more time for me than studying does. So while it feels like a priority and it makes sense to work on it first thing in the morning and get it out of the way, I know that it's easy for me to go off schedule when working on papers. So if I leave studying for the end of the day, it's very likely that I'll be too tired to focus on it and I'll skip it altogether. So just a scenario I've lived many times before is let me sit down, spend 6 hours on a paper, and then afterwards I'm going to sit and study another subject. Every time that subject will get dropped at the end of the night. So instead, I'm going to study Spanish first each day before I work on the papers. Focusing on the less important task first ensures that I'll actually complete it instead of pushing it to the end of the day where I will inevitably ignore it. So there you have it, a study schedule for finals time. To recap, step 1 is to grab your tools for figuring out your schedule. Step 2 is to write down your deadlines. Step 3 is to figure out which days you will study for which exams. Step 4 is to determine which days you will be working on papers. And step 5 is to figure out what time of day you will focus on each subject. So if you are still having trouble getting started, you can join us for our final webinar of the semester next Tuesday, December 6th from 4 to 5 p.m. We will be doing a virtual co-working session, so it will be an opportunity to utilize some timed work blocks to get yourself started. So again, we'll just be sitting and working together, and it's a good way to jumpstart productivity. If you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. If not, that's it for our webinar today. So thank you for joining us and happy studying.